Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and for holding this hearing. And Professor Bridges, let's start with the obvious. Texas's law known as SB 8 bans abortion at roughly 6 weeks of pregnancy. Isn't SB 8 a clear violation of the right to abortion prior to fetal viability, that right having been established under Roe versus Wade and reaffirmed in Planned Parenthood versus Casey, and most recently in 2018 in June Medical Services versus Russo?
Absolutely. In the words of Justice Sotomayor, SB 8 is flagrantly unconstitutional. Nevertheless, it is in effect.
So it would be fair to say that SB 8 is actually blatantly constitutional.
It's
blatantly unconstitutional.
Absolutely. Every superlative I have for you: blatantly, flagrantly, obviously, undeniably, all of them.
Well, Professor Bridges, what do you make of the United States Supreme Court's decision to allow the blatantly unconstitutional SB 8 to remain in effect while its constitutionality is challenged in the lower courts?
I take that to be a sign that the Supreme Court has backed away from its role as the apolitical branch of government. While the executive and the legislative branches are supposed to be the political branches, the judiciary is supposed to be the apolitical branch. Nevertheless, the Supreme Court is making decisions that reveal that it is being motivated by raw political will, raw political power.
Well, Professor Bridges, was it extraordinary for the Supreme Court, without full briefing, without oral argument, and without even the dignity of a reasoned opinion, to use its shadow docket to temporarily allow the state of Texas to deny a recognized constitutional right to nearly 1 out of every 10 women of reproductive age in this country?
Absolutely. It was extraordinary. It was egregious. It was extreme. Prior to September 1, very few people would have imagined that the Supreme Court would let a flagrantly unconstitutional law go into effect when it had the power to enjoin it.
And in fact, Professor Bridges, by allowing SB 8 to remain in effect during the pendency of the challenge to its constitutionality, the Supreme Court itself ignored stare decisis and denied every woman in the entire state of Texas a fundamental constitutional right. Isn't that correct?
That's correct. The Supreme Court backed away from its own established precedents, even regarding the shadow docket, which is to preserve the status quo. The Supreme Court allowed the status quo to change, and in allowing the status quo to change, it allowed for the infringement of the Texans' right to terminate a pregnancy before viability.
And you've touched on this, Professor Bridges. Does the Supreme Court's decision to allow SB 8 to remain in effect indicate how this ultra-conservative majority will approach future abortion cases?
Well, it sends the strongest signal I can imagine about how the Supreme Court feels about abortion rights, which are still fundamental rights under the US Constitution. The Supreme Court's holding in Whole Woman's Health versus Jackson, its decision to let that flagrantly unconstitutional law go into effect, reveals that the Supreme Court does not care much for the abortion right, that it will not protect the abortion right in the same way that it will protect other rights that it favors.
Thank you, Professor. SB 8 is touted as protecting women when in fact it's doing nothing more than attempting to control, criminalize, and dehumanize women and their ability to exercise control over their reproductive health. Ms. Pinheiro, thank you for sharing your story here with us today. And based on your experiences, what substantive effects would the outcome that Professor Bridges just discussed have on individuals in your state?
People in the state of Florida are already facing restrictions to abortions. Florida has a 24-week gestational ban already in place, and any delay in abortion care should be and remain unconstitutional.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Gohmert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you